Starting point. On the left, we have a picture of Wendy's house with a boy and a girl sitting out front. And we have Alfred, Ellen, and Elise, and me and Austin sitting out, or standing, I suppose, on a stairwell outside. Papa and Mama. My father, Harold Dahl, was a Norwegian who came from a small town near Oslo called Sarpsborg. His own father, my grandfather, was a fairly preposterous merchant who owned a store in Sarpsborg and traded in just about everything from cheese to chicken wire. I am writing these words in 1984, but this grandfather of mine was born, believe it or not, in 1820, shortly after Wellington had defeated Napoleon at Waterloo. If my grandfather had been alive today, he would have been 164 years old. My father would have been 121. Both my father and my grandfather were late starters so far as children were concerned. When my father was 14, which is still more than 100 years ago, he was up on the roof of the family house replacing some loose tiles when he slipped and fell. He broke his left arm below the elbow. Somebody ran to fetch the doctor, and half an hour later, this gentleman made a majestic and drunken arrival in his horse-drawn buggy. He was so drunk that he mistook the fractured elbow for a dislocated shoulder. "We'll soon put this back into place," he cried out, and 2 men were called off the street to help with the pulling. They were instructed to hold my father by the waist, while the doctor grabbed him by the wrist of the broken arm and shouted, "Pull, men, pull as hard as you can." The pain must have been excruciating. The victim screamed, and his mother, who was watching the performance in horror, shouted, "Stop!" But by then the pullers had done so much damage that a splinter of bone was sticking out through the skin of the forearm. This was in 1877, and orthopedic surgery was not what it is today. So they simply amputated the arm at the elbow, and for the rest of his life, my father had to manage with one arm. Fortunately, it was the left arm that he lost, and gradually over the years, he taught himself to do more or less anything he wanted with just the 4 fingers and thumb of his right hand. He could tie a shoelace as quickly as you and me, and for cutting up food on his plate, he sharpened the bottom edge of a fork so that it served as both knife and fork all in one. He kept his ingenious instrument in a slim leather case and carried it in his pocket wherever he went. The loss of an arm, he used to say, caused him only one serious inconvenience. He found it impossible to cut the top off a boiled egg. My father was a year or so older than his brother Oscar, but they were exceptionally close, and soon after they left school, they went for a long walk together to plan their future. They decided that a small town like Sarpsborg in a small country like Norway was no place in which to make a fortune. So what they must do, they agreed, was go away to one of the big countries, either to England or France, where opportunities to make good would be boundless. Their own father, an amiable giant, nearly 7 foot tall, lacked the drive and ambition of his sons, and he refused to support his tomfool idea. When he forbade them to go, they ran away from home, and somehow or other the 2 of them managed to work their way to France on a cargo ship. From Calais, they went to Paris, and in Paris they agreed to separate because each of them wished to be independent of the other. Uncle Oscar, for some reason, headed west for La Rochelle on the Atlantic coast, while my father remained in Paris for the time being. The story of how these 2 brothers each started a totally separate business in different countries and how each of them made a fortune is interesting, but there is no time to tell it here, except in the briefest manner. Take my Uncle Oscar first. La Rochelle was then, and still is, a fishing port. By the time he was 40, he had become the wealthiest man in town. He owned a fleet of trawlers called Pêcheurs de l'Atlantique, and a large canning factory to can the sardines his travelers brought in. He acquired a wife from a good family and a majestic townhouse, as well as a large chateau in the country. He became a collector of Louis XV furniture, good pictures, and rare books, and all these beautiful things together with the 2 properties, and still in the family. I have not seen chateau in the country, but I was in the La Rochelle house a couple of years ago, and it really is something. The furniture alone should be in a museum. While Uncle Oscar was bustling around in La Rochelle, his one-armed brother Harold, my own father, was not sitting on his rump doing nothing. He had met in Paris another young Norwegian called Adestein, and the two of them now decided to form a partnership and become shipbrokers. A shipbroker is a person who supplies a ship with everything it needs when it comes into port: fuel and food, ropes and paint, soap and towels, hammers and nails, and thousands of other tiddly little items. A shipbroker is a kind of an enormous shopkeeper for ships, and by far the most important item he supplies to them is the fuel on which the ship's engine runs. In those days, fuel meant only one thing. It meant coal. There was no oil-burning motor ships on the high seas at the time. All ships were steamships, and these old steamers would take on hundreds and often thousands of tons of coal in one go. To the shipbrokers, coal was black gold. My father and his newfound friend, Mr. Anestine, stood all this very well. They made sense and told each other to set up their shipbroking business in one of the great coaling ports of Europe. Which was it to be? The answer was simple. The greatest coaling port in the world at the time was Cardiff, in South Wales. So off to Cardiff they went, these two ambitious young men carrying with them little or no luggage. But my father had something more delightful than luggage. He had a wife, a young French girl called Marie, whom he had recently married in Paris. In Cardiff, the shipbroking firm of Anestine and Dahl was set up, and a single room in Bute Street was rented as an office. From then on, we have what sounds like one of those exaggerated fairy stories of success, but in reality it was the result of tremendous hard work and brainy work by those two friends. Very soon, Addison and Dahl had more business than the partners could handle alone. Larger office space was acquired and more staff were engaged. The real money then began rolling in. Within a few years, my father was able to buy a fine house in the village of Llanliff, just outside Cardiff, and there his wife Marie bore him two children, a girl and a boy. But tragically, she died after giving birth to the second child. When the shock and sorrow of her death had begun to subside a little, my father suddenly realized that his two small children ought at the very least to have a stepmother to care for them. What is more, he felt terribly lonely. It was quite obvious that he must try to find himself another wife. But this was easier said than done for a Norwegian living in South Wales who didn't know very many people. So he decided to take a holiday and travel back to his own country, Norway. And who knows, he might, if he was lucky, find himself a lovely new bride in his own country. Over in Norway, during the summer of 1911, while taking a trip in a small coaster steamer in the Oslofjord, he met a young lady called Sophie Magdalene Hesselberg. Being a fellow who knew a good thing when he saw one, he proposed to her within a week and married her soon after that. There is a picture of Mama engaged. Harold Dahl took his Norwegian wife on a honeymoon in Paris, and after that back to the house in Llanliff. The two of them were deeply in love and blissfully happy, and during the next 6 weeks she bore him 4 children. A girl, another girl, a boy, me, and a third girl. Here is Roald Dahl at 8 months. There were now 6 children in the family, 2 by my father's first wife and 4 by his second. A larger and grander house was needed, and money was there to buy it. So, in 1918, when I was 2, we all moved into an imposing country mansion beside the village of Radar, about 8 miles west of Cardiff. I remember it as a mighty house with turrets on its roof, and with majestic lawns and terraces all around it. There were many acres of farm and woodland, and a number of cottages for the staff. Very soon the meadows were full of milking cows, and the sties were full of pigs, and the chicken one was full of chickens. There were several massive shire horses for pulling the plows and the hay wagons, and there was a plowman and a cowman and a couple of gardeners and all manner of servants in the house itself. Like his brother Oscar in La Rochelle, Harold Dahl had made it in no uncertain manner. But what interests me most about all these two brothers, Harold and Oscar, is this. Although they came from a simple, unsophisticated, small town, both of them, quite independently of one another, developed a powerful interest in beautiful things. As soon as they could afford it, they began to fill their house with lovely paintings and fine furniture. In addition to that, my father became an expert gardener and, above all, a collector of alpine plants. My mother used to tell me how the two of them would go on expeditions up into the mountains of Norway, and how he would frighten her to death by climbing one-handed up steep cliff faces to reach small alpine plants growing high up on some rocky ledge. He was also an accomplished wood carver, and most of the mirror frames in the house were his own work. So, indeed, was the entire mantelpiece around the fireplace in the living room, a splendid design of fruit and foliage and intertwining branches carved in oak. He was a tremendous diary writer. I still have one of his many notebooks from the Great War of 1914 to 1918. Every single day during those 5 years, he would write several pages of comment and observation about the events of the time. He wrote with a pen, and although Norwegian was his mother tongue, he always wrote his diaries in perfect English. He harbored a curious theory about how to develop a sense of beauty in the minds of his children. Every time my mother became pregnant, he would wait until the last 3 months of her pregnancy, and then he would announce to her that the glorious walks must begin. These glorious walks consisted of him taking her to places of great beauty in the countryside and walking with her for about an hour each day so that she could absorb the splendor of the surroundings. His theory was that if the eye of a pregnant woman was constantly observing the beauty of nature, this beauty would somehow become transmitted to the mind of the unborn baby within her womb, and that baby would grow up to be a lover of beautiful things. This was the treatment that all of his children received before they were born. Here's a letter from Papa.